There is a hidden world that our normal senses rarely touch. A world that is not governed by the cause and effect chain of events of the ordinary scientific paradigm.
There's truly a post-rational openness to the miraculous healing, to synchronicity, to coincidence, to all the beautiful, magical dimensions of our experience that simply can't be explained.
It is a world that to some degree has a personal connection with each and every conscious human being.
Actually, science has learned a little bit about these things, and it's not just fantasy. Some of it is real.
It is an evolving world, becoming more and more apparent to more and more people.
And it's going to happen, I think, to everybody. You'll have that moment of synchronicity that will make you question and understand whether you should take the blue pill or the red one, and really understand what is the backstory. Why are we really indeed here?
At its most profound level, this unseen realm impacts humanity in ways we don't yet fully understand.
It's clear from the evidence and from anecdotal testimony in the literature through the ages that human beings have always been in contact with something not human, whether we've called it the gods or religious figures or visitors from other worlds, angels, earth-oriented spirits. We have been in contact throughout our entire history.
Understanding how we can have a lawful universe where we've transcended magic and we've transcended myths, but we can still recognize this transcendent dimension of reality, I think that involves understanding that there's something about human life which creates a veil. In other words, that within our human understanding, we are behind a veil, and that there is a larger reality to the universe that's not just in our heads, it's not just mental, it's not just subjective, but it's not physical, or it's not in time and space in the same way that normal objects and events are in the physical universe.
This is the realm of the paranormal. In what follows, we shall explore the many incredible facets of the paranormal. We shall bring forth what can be established as real and important for the development of humanity. Important for humanity as the supernatural and the paranormal become universally accepted into our expanded world of life-changing experiences. In many ways, certain kinds of paranormal activity have become commonplace through television and social media. One form is the endless parade of paranormal investigations of haunted houses and aberrations. Here, paranormal investigators are looking for the presence of spirits in the haunted Hotel de Paris in Georgetown, Colorado.
So we've got this flashlight is kind of in and out.
So if there's any spirits in the cellar today, can you please come in the middle of our circle and let us know you're here? If there are spirits here in the basement, can you make these flashlights turn on full? Or at least one of them.
This one, thank you.
Can you make it turn on brighter?
It's like, no.
Equally odd is the fact that people sometimes pick up EVPs, voices and sounds that are heard only during playback of normal audio recordings. Then there is the domain of UFO sightings and alien contact experiences.
We're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh.
Of course, since World War II, there have been many well-documented cases of strange lights in the sky.
The evidence of our sightings of mystery lights in the sky and craft, landed craft, our experiences being taken aboard craft, clearly point to the need to expand our definition of what it is that is in our skies. It may not be physical craft. The nuts and bolts approach to UFOs may be one aspect of the entire phenomenon, but there's a paraphysical nature to that as well. These may not be craft in the human sense. They may be energy vehicles of some sort that appear to us in the form of craft. These may be the reasons why they have the capability of unusual maneuvers, sudden appearances, disappearances, extraordinary characteristics that are unknown to terrestrial craft. The term UAP actually may be more appropriate than UFO, unidentified aerial phenomena, rather than object, because these may be energy forms that we're dealing with and not physical objects.
And in the past 10 years, there have been a number of TV series devoted to capturing some of the strange interactions derived from contact with the mythical creature known as Sasquatch.
It was about a 5-minute deal where we caught something on the FLIR. It was very, very large, 2 to 3 times the size of a person. And then in time, something much smaller, about the size of a person, walked up to it, and then the smaller one continued on behind it and up the hill. And we've got it all recorded on therm. We don't know what it is, but we know what we think it might be.
At the same time, a movement known as the New Age movement brought to light a variety of spiritual impacts on human minds and human bodies derived from contact with non-human intelligent beings.
If we look at the contactee literature, we have people talking about fairies, about angels, about spiritual masters, religious figures, coming into contact with them and having suddenly an explosion of change in their consciousness and even in the body. And now it's happening in the UFO arena.
Other paranormal phenomenon the New Age movement brought to light included channelings, near-death experiences, mediums, crystal healing, chakra balancing, sound healings, and shamanic contacts with the spirit realm.
Shamanism, the only thing you need to have on board, in terms of your belief system, to benefit from a shamanic path is an idea that there's the here, the ordinary reality, and the over yonder, the non-ordinary reality. And some people call it the spirit world or the astral. But there's this and then there's that. And a shaman would tell you that the non-ordinary reality, the spirit world, is the world where all of the action is. That's where all of the most meaningful part of life is.
And, of course, the universal power of love, whether divine or human, is actually a paranormal phenomenon.
There's an element of the miraculous in that which just goes beyond any kind of rational explanation. It's not irrational, it's super rational. It's above the level of reason. And I think that when we look for miracles in the world, that's what we're really looking for, is things which are beyond reason.
A collection of paranormal events and experiences became part of psychology at the beginning of the 20th century. A part of psychology known as parapsychology. The ordinary as well as the strange workings of the human mind and its interaction with the world have been explored by the great ancient civilizations including Egypt, Persia, Greece, China, and India.
We call anything that you call paranormal or supernatural, there's nothing outside of nature, everything is natural, but we would call them the mysteries, and they've been called that for thousands of years within certain circles. And the mysteries don't want to be known, and I don't believe they'll ever be fully known. They are everything within the lexicon of the paranormal experience. And they have a purpose, not being able to be fully known, we then go onto a path of study. We expand our consciousness. We ask the questions and we seek the answers, of which we don't get an answer. It's the rabbit hole. It's the many riddles of Thoth, or, you know, when you read the ancient texts or even the masters, everything is a riddle wrapped within a riddle. That is how the mysteries are composed themselves. What is Bigfoot? What is a UAP or a UFO? What is a ghost? You know, we think we get the answer when we ask, but it's an answer that leads us to another question. That's the nature of the mysteries themselves. They are wired to be that way. They don't perform at the circus. They don't want to be fully known and fully understood.
By the end of the 19th century, the investigations into the mind coalesced into a science known as psychology. Today, psychology is defined as the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. A study of the mind that fairly quickly dismissed any scientific validity to the paranormal. Indeed, scientific study of the paranormal became the kiss of death for anybody who took it up in academia. However, it did not start out that way. Of particular importance to establishing some scientific basis of parapsychology was the work by two of the giants of modern psychology, Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung and the American philosopher and psychologist William James. James, in his groundbreaking book, Varieties of Religious Experience, noticed that many religious experiences involve an object which cannot be sensibly perceived. He recognized that the ability to be aware of insensible objects in the mind, such as being aware of a spiritual presence, is an ability particular to human beings. James argued that these experiences are sometimes connected with religion, but not always, and that they are not at all unusual, but are in fact quite common. Further, he pointed out that for those who have had such experiences, they are irrefutable and no rational argument will dissuade someone of their reality, even if the person cannot explain or describe their religious or spiritual experiences to others. His findings have become the grounds of pointing out the deeper manifestation of many paranormal phenomenon, particularly contact experiences and glimpses into a hidden reality. Carl Jung, on the other hand, created some of the best-known parapsychological concepts, including synchronicity, collective unconscious, and archetypes. Synchronicity describes coincidences which appear significantly related but have no discernible causal connection, yet have powerful meaning for the individual who experiences it. The collective unconscious, a deep psychic system of universal and impersonal motivators of behavior shared by all humans, is an unseen substratum that exerts an enormous influence on people's lives, but can become known through a kind of bubbling up into a person's mind. Archetypes are universal, archaic symbols and images that derive from the collective unconscious. They are a kind of innate, unspecific knowledge derived from the sum total of human history, symbols and images which prefigure and guide human behavior with no apparent causal mechanism. Jung talked about these paranormal phenomenon in an interview before he died.
There are these peculiar faculties of the psyche that it isn't entirely confined to space and time. You can have dreams or visions of the future. You can see round corners and such things. Only ignorance deny these facts. It's quite evident that they do exist and have existed always.
These early attempts to legitimize the scientific study of the paranormal and its related phenomenon, including extrasensory perception, telepathy, precognition, and clairvoyance, met with fierce opposition and derision by the scientific community. And very quickly, parapsychology was considered nothing more than a pseudoscience by the vast majority of mainstream scientists. These scientists claimed paranormal events were impossible because there was no direct causal chain that could explain paranormal phenomenon. Furthermore, these events had long been associated with religion and the practice of magic, which were also denied by the mainstream scientific paradigm. A paradigm that holds only these beliefs. The material universe is the only ultimate reality. Reality is controlled by fixed laws and blind chance. We are part of a universe that has no creator, no objective purpose, and no objective meaning or destiny, and no free will. The scientific paradigm holds that all ideas about gods, enlightened beings, spirit guides, in fact, all non-physical beings or forces are superstitions or delusions. Consciousness is identical to the physical processes in the brain, and your life, or any life, has no objective purpose or destiny. And finally, death of the body is the death of the mind, and there is no afterlife. However, today a growing number of thought leaders, spiritual practitioners, and scientific researchers now argue that the scientific paradigm, in spite of its enormous success, has its limitations in describing the total reality of the world humans live in. It is a world rich in possibilities, a world of enchantment, a world of personal guidance for each individual as he or she advances along a spiritual path of awakening. This is the world of the paranormal.
Spirituality and quantum physics are on the same plane, as it goes outside of the parameters of classical science, Newtonian physics, which is taught. We're taught that everything is measurable, everything is either physical or material, and that's just not true. Everything is not that way, but that's classical science, and that's where academia stays.
Jung and his friend Wolfgang Pauli, the great early quantum physicist and the architect of the exclusion principle, the idea that you could only have so many electrons in a given shell around the nucleus, they thought about this a lot, and they finally decided that nature has two sets of rules, or two general vectors of causality, and the one classical physics is pretty good with. But the other, they called it the principle of acausality, and that's what produces synchronicities.
We are embodied creatures. We are stuck in space-time. There's lots of limitations which are quite real, but I think in terms of the mind, it's much, much less constrained than that.
I really think the challenge is to carefully be willing to expand our idea of what counts as natural, so that things which were previously understood to be inexplicably supernatural become included and understood within a larger, more roomy, naturalistic understanding of the universe.
Early on, when science began looking at the paranormal, it focused on the power of the mind through inexplicable psychic forces to influence and change the material world. If true, this would be a valuable and perhaps dangerous ability. Indeed, as portrayed in hundreds of Hollywood movies, it is the superpower many superheroes and villains possess, as they are able to move objects and battle each other using the power of their minds. In fact, the CIA and the Soviet Union have funded projects to test the viability of these powers. Their research singled out 5 of the paranormal phenomenon, sometimes called the Psi phenomena: telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, psychic healing, and psychokinesis. Psychokinesis, or its older term, telekinesis, is the mental ability to influence the material world without any known physical mechanism. Some of the earliest demonstrations of this were photographed and recorded as ordinary people concentrated on relatively small objects and seemed able to move them. Perhaps the best known case was the self-proclaimed psychic Uri Geller demonstrating and teaching people to bend spoons and other cutlery. Showmanship aside, is it really possible for the mind to affect physical objects? Dean Radin, director of the prestigious Institute of Noetic Sciences, has conducted rigorous experiments to demonstrate scientifically the mind's ability to influence the material world.
In 2012 and 2013, we did an experiment at Burning Man. Burning Man is this big festival that happens in the Nevada desert once a year, where you start with nothing, just a flat desert, and then over the course of a week or two, in 2013, 65,000 people showed up, and it's pretty well structured, and it's a big art festival basically. But the focus of the festival is the burning of the man. The burning of the man means that a man is constructed out of wood, and a big man is constructed out of wood. In this 2013, it was the man was standing on a very large structure that looked like a UFO. So everyone knew then, at a certain time, a certain day, that the man would be burned as part of the Burning Man idea. And so it's a big structure. It creates a huge fire. It's a big bonfire. All 65,000 people are sitting around it and watching. They knew that at 9 p.m. the ritual begins. So we had 6 random number generators on the playa at that time, the desert floor. And we're running an hour before, during, and after the ceremony with the idea that when you have 65,000 people all expecting something to happen at a given time, that this constitutes a change in coherence in group attention. And so the generators were there because we made a hypothesis that something physical would change as a result of this mental change. And in fact, we found that. We found within seconds of 9 p.m., which is when the festival, the burning began, or at least the ceremony began, that there was a significant cross-correlation among the random data being put out by the random generators. Well, obviously, if you have a significant cross-correlation, it's not completely random anymore. Each generator was putting out data that was similar to the other generators, and they're designed to be completely random and not similar to anything, including themselves. But nevertheless, we saw this effect, which we had predicted based on previous experiments of this type, where mental coherence seems to be reflected in physical coherence.
Perhaps the most common psi phenomena is precognition, or successfully predicting future events that could not be rationally predicted from current knowledge. Predicting the sun will rise tomorrow is not precognition, but that gut feeling we all get sometimes about future wonderful occurrences or potential danger is precognition. Communications that come to us through dreams, visions, or hearing an inner voice.
Well, I laugh about it now because everything turned out so well. But at the time, I really didn't believe in premonitions, and I'm glad to say I finally listened. Some friends and I were on a backpacking trip, and we found a creek to camp near. And after dinner, we talked for a little while, and then I went to my tent to settle in. I must have fallen asleep because I remember this voice waking me. It was saying, "Get out of there." Well, I ignored it, of course, and tried to go back to sleep, but that voice kept nagging me. It was saying, "Get out of there. Get out of there." Finally, it screamed so loud, I sat up and really listened to it. "Mark, get out of there now." Well, I woke the others, and that's when we heard it. It was a dull roar. We scrambled up the banks of the creek to higher ground, and a few seconds later, a wall of water tore through our campsite. We could see mud and logs everywhere. We had our shoes, our clothes, but that was about it. But we were alive. All thanks to my inner voice.
Here we have a warning of a dangerous future event showing up in a person's mind. An event that could not have been predicted from the normal laws of causation. A refinement of this skill has been valued by military operations. And of course, precognition is the mainstay of psychics and mediums. In all of these cases, the mind is the recipient of non-ordinary sensory information of some future event. Telepathy, a mainstay of science fiction and superpowers, is direct mind-to-mind communication. Communication between minds using no physical medium of exchange. In fact, we all have this ability to some degree to read what's on another person's mind, to see what they're thinking. It's a necessary part of being able to function in social situations, whether it's one-on-one or in groups. But is it possible to receive mental intentions and information from a person who is not in the recipient's spatial location? Numerous scientific studies and military operations have demonstrated and utilized this paranormal ability, all clearly supporting the idea that we are all connected in a non-physical way. In reality, this kind of paranormal communication can be in the form of words, or something more symbolic, as was the case of the grandmother communicating to her son and grandchild.
Well, when I was just a little girl, maybe 9 or 10, one day my dad said, "Get in the car, we're going to see grandmother." You know, she lived just about an hour's drive from our home. We didn't go see her very often on account of the fact they didn't get along very well after her daughter divorced my dad, but that day we went. I remember on the way over, my dad told me that grandmother's been bedridden. She's been sick for a while now. I remember asking him if she was gonna get any better. He said maybe. Grandmother lived in one of those narrow row houses. It was musty smelling, like old clothes. And there wasn't much light. The rugs were dark and the walls hadn't been painted in years. Everywhere was dusty and dim, except above the fireplace. Right there on the mantle were her most prized possessions. Her goldfinch figurines, they were all lined up. There had to have been like 100 of them. I remember when the light would come through the big picture window in her living room, it would make them light up and be all sparkly and golden, like they almost would come alive. My dad and grandmother didn't say much that afternoon. And about after an hour we left. And when we got home, we took a walk in the park behind our house. And I remember I was skipping along one of the paths when I saw my father sit down on a bench beside a small creek. He started crying. I mean, Dad was a big man. I mean, he was a carpenter. He never cried. You know how parents, they never want their kids to know anything's wrong, so. But he saw me, and he didn't even pretend like he wasn't crying. He didn't try to hide it at all. He just smiled and pointed at a nearby tree. Said, "See that goldfinch there on the nearest branch?" The little bird sat only a couple feet away from us, and she fluttered her feathers, her all golden, and her wings were just all sparkly and shiny like she'd been dipped in liquid sunshine. And she turned her golden head towards us and chirped and hopped from branch to branch, always looking at us. I could just tell she was smiling. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" I asked. He said yes, everything was fine. Grandmother was free now.
Scientific experiments have also demonstrated that telepathy is more prevalent between people who are already closely connected, such as with twins or family members, as was in the goldfinch story. However, no paranormal phenomenon receives more attention by intelligence organizations and the military than clairvoyance, or what is called remote viewing. For the United States, the project was called Stargate, the collective name for advanced psychic functioning or remote viewing experiments, as well as programs to train people in the accurate method of psychic spying, or information gathering for the U.S. military and intelligence agencies. Remote viewers were given a target and then described or drew what they saw. The ability of a mind to have a direct perception of a remote physical location without using normal senses is so common that people can sign up for classes to develop this skill.
If you're interested in remote viewing, and if you'd like to unlock the hidden powers of your mind, I'd like to suggest to you, take a look at the Gold Standard course.
Or get trained in remote viewing at places like the Monroe Institute outside of Charlotte, Virginia. Lorraine Mahler is an ex-Olympic athlete and psychic healer who traveled to the Institute and learned remote viewing.
I learned remote viewing from Simeon Hine in the late 1990s, and I was amazed because I was a good student and could get targets pretty well. You know, it surprised me because you know, you're writing and you're going through these protocols and you describe something that you can't see with any of your physical senses, and so you're picking up information from something other than that. And what the remote viewing did was hone that sense again, and it's what I call the internal navigator, because by practicing, and I did hundreds of sessions, and when you look at the target and you see what you've drawn and you compare, and then you can see where you were right on, and you can see where the left brain jumps in and starts overanalyzing and takes over. And I think what it did was help me put that relationship into a much better working relationship, so that I wasn't analysing things. I do tend to be a very analytical person, and it allowed that intuitive self to come forth and for me to trust it, and to know that this is really giving me correct information, and it's very precise. And how could I describe the pattern on a man's shirt in a picture that I can't even see? You know, and it is amazing, but we all have that ability.
So to summarize, telepathy, direct mind-to-mind communication, precognition, communications from the future to the mind, psychokinesis, the mind affecting the material world and clairvoyance, and remote viewing, the mind seeing the material world through extrasensory means. These are the big four paranormal phenomenon that have been well established in research. And all four involve the human mind and some sort of interaction with the world or other minds that are inexplicable by traditional scientific causal chain of events. Today, parapsychology researchers are adding a fifth phenomenon, psychic healing, or what might be called psychokinesis on biological and mental systems. The next two stories illustrate the two most common methods of psychic or spiritual healing. First, the laying on of hands, and then the power of prayer.
Yeah, when I was 12 years old, I had bone cancer in my left hip. And the doctors, they gave up on me. The hospital sent me home. I was really frightened. Most days, the pain was so bad, I couldn't even walk. my dad, he had to carry me to the bathroom. The worst part was I kept having this dream, and it kept telling me that it was only a matter of days before I was going to die. I was really scared. One day, my mother brought this woman into my bedroom. She was big. She had white hair, these eyeglasses on a little chain around her neck. First, I thought she was a nurse, but she didn't really act like a nurse. I remember she said, "Hello, Cyrus. You call me Ellen. Now point to where it hurts the most." I pointed to my hip. I remember she said, "I'm going to put my hand right here, and I want you to lie still." Well, immediately, I felt this warmth on my skin, and it started to like burrow down inside me. I was happier than I had been in weeks. She stayed for about 2 hours after that, then left. She visited about 3 more times after that. And at the end of the second visit, I could get up and walk to the bathroom myself. At the end of the visits, about 2 weeks after the visits ended, the doctors took a CAT scan, and they call me the miracle boy. I've been cancer-free now for 7 years. 7 whole years. I asked my mother who Ellen was, and she said, "Just a friend of a friend." Someday I'm going to find her, and I'm going to thank her.
Since World War II, a number of teachable spiritual healing practices have come into the world. One of the best known and successful is the Japanese art of Reiki. Dr. Sheila Smith McCoy is a Reiki master.
What Reiki has taught me is one way of engaging with the divine power to untap the human potential to be and heal and manifest things that are positive in the world. And every people have these traditions that have been ignored and unexplained or sloughed off as superstition, but they're coming to light from traditions all over the world now and being recognized as toolkits that we can use to get where we as humans have been moving slowly all along.
The other kind of paranormal or psychic healing is referred to in Christianity as the power of prayer. The opening up of people's minds to invite divine intervention in the healing process of another person.
Well, in my family, they call me the Miracle Man, but that's not really the whole story. I'm a member of a prayer group that there's 7 of us, 1 other guy and 5 women. We meet about once a week and pray for really anyone who needs it. Someone who's ill, someone in the hospital. Sometimes it's a man going off to war, that kind of thing. We've been doing it for about 5 years. One of the most wonderful days of my life was when my only daughter gave birth to her first child, a little boy, my grandson. I thought the most of that kid. But he was born a few weeks early, and they didn't think he was going to make it. But after a few weeks, they sent him home. And then one day my son-in-law called and said that they had to take him back to the hospital and things didn't look good. I thought the most of that child. I prayed nonstop that God, take me instead of him. And then my daughter called and said that he was better and that they were taking him home. That's the last thing I remember. My wife told me that they found me on the sofa, that I'd had a heart attack. Apparently I had died 3 times on the way to the hospital, but the paramedics brought me back every time. When I was there, I was in a coma. I was told that even if I did survive, they didn't think that I'd be much more than a vegetable, because my brain had lost oxygen when I died. And then, after a couple of weeks, I woke up. My wife and my daughter and that wonderful child were there. Apparently the prayer group had been praying for me every day since I'd gone to the hospital.
The power of prayer as a paranormal phenomenon clearly points to the ability of a mind or minds to intentionally connect with a greater reality. A reality that some would call God or a higher spirit or spirit being. Prayer as a practice is a major part of almost all religions, particularly when it comes to healings. Santiago de Chimayo in New Mexico is one of Christianity's great places of spiritual and physical healing. Father James Suntum is a pastor there.
People come here and they are often praying for particular kinds of answers or healings. And there are people who go away thinking that they have experienced those kinds of healings, and we have heard many stories. Most people go away saying there's something special here. There's something that they can explain, some peace, some experience of God's effective love here that they don't experience other places.
Diane Musho Hamilton Roshi is a teacher of Zen. For her, prayer and spiritual healing are a part of Buddhism as well.
You know, healings are probably an example of, again, just the kind of inexplicable dimension of our experience. I have a student who has been diagnosed with 4th stage ovarian cancer. And there's no reason that she should have recovered from this, but we did a particular kind of ritual. We did a laying on of hands, and her tumors are gone. And there's no explaining that. There's no, what makes it a miracle healing or a miraculous healing is you can't explain the cause and effect of it. And yet she was ill, now she is well, and the only thing in between was her intense yoga practice and this moment of laying on of hands. And now her tumors are gone. So what is that? That's just a question, and yet there's an experience in the heart that says it's meaningful, and that there's a lot in reality that's possible that we don't understand. Thank you that we don't understand it.
These types of healings show the power of the intentions of the mind and how responsive reality can be to that power. A mental power that has to be differentiated from childish demands for the way a person wants the world to be for themselves. However, there are 2 other scientifically inexplicable psi phenomena that have had the greatest impact on the world that we live in on a day-to-day basis. They are synchronicity and channeling. The practice of channeling, where a person's mind is taken over by a paranormal source for the purpose of communication, has been around for centuries. There are countless stories of shamans, prophets, psychic mediums, and ordinary people who hear voices or receive some supernatural knowledge from a greater reality. One of the best known and influential channeling texts is called A Course in Miracles, a 1976 book by Helen Schuckman. It is a curriculum for those seeking to achieve spiritual transformation. The other, a collection of writings known as the Seth Material, was dictated by Jane Roberts to her husband from late 1963 until her death in 1984. According to Roberts, the words were spoken by a discarnate entity named Seth. This material is regarded as one of the cornerstones of New Age philosophy. In 1952, George Van Tassel claimed to receive messages by a telepathic communication from an extraterrestrial and interdimensional being named Ashtar. This source became the first documented channeling of an alien being during the age of UFOs.
And now new information is coming to light, and I think it's been there all along. It's just that we haven't found it until recently, that there are other kinds of contact experiences going on that people associate with aliens or extraterrestrials. And for lack of a better term, I think we need to call them non-human intelligent beings, because we really don't know what they are or where they're from. They could be interdimensional, from a parallel universe, not from another world far off in space. And a lot of these contact experiences take place in what would be called a matrix reality. That is, the contactee is suddenly transported to kind of a liminal between world, which some would describe as sounding like the astral plane, which is neither here on Earth nor somewhere else like a craft per se, where they are having some sort of interaction with an intelligence, which they may or may not see. But there is telepathic communication, there is a sense of a presence, there is usually some information imparted.
In the case of Van Tassel, an alien being contacted him and gave him instructions to build the Integratron, a unique building in Landers, California, near Joshua Tree National Park. A building where people inside the structure claim to experience rejuvenation, anti-gravity, and astral travel. This is a case where a paraphysical spirit, through a mind, resulted in a creation in the material world. Did this knowledge come from a person's own hidden psyche?
So it's hard to tease apart in a channeled, bit of spiritual teaching, that which is arising from the subconscious mind of the channeler, and that which is apparently of extra mental influence. And I think I don't think it's easy to say that it's purely spiritual communication or it's purely subconscious. I mean, I think there may be some cases where it's easy to say it's purely subconscious, but plenty of others where that explanation is hard to fathom because of the sophistication and the evident spiritual quality of the teaching.
For example, channeled by Joseph Smith Jr., the Book of Commandments is considered divine scripture by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and is part of the larger Mormon doctrine and covenants. But the most impactful historical channeling is the Quran, a text that was orally revealed by God to the Prophet Muhammad through the Archangel Gabriel over a period of some 23 years. This channeled text holds sway over Islam and its 1.8 billion adherents. Channelers, also sometimes known as psychic mediums, often use what are called spirit guides, friendly spirits who give them knowledge and help them on their spiritual journeys or bring texts or symbols into the world, such as the real-life experience of Sybil Rose. Sybil lives in Rhode Island. Already on the healing spiritual path, she unexpectedly began a channeling experience after a near-death incident.
I was in a really, really serious car accident where I flipped my car several times, and as I was flipping it, I felt that I saw God because I heard a voice say to me in a big bright flash of light, say to me, pull your hands off the steering wheel and pull your feet to your chest, and you'll make it through this accident. And you know, when you're in an accident like that, that's the last thing you want to do is take your hands off the steering wheel. So I listened to it, and I did. I threw my hands up, I pulled my feet up, and the car flipped again, crushed, and you know, I had to use the jaws of life to get out of the car. And the next day, when I did go home that night, people were actually calling me, and especially the police that found me, and said they were calling this a miracle. So that kind of started a whole nother scenario for me. And I was talking to a woman who was an intuitive person, and she says, you know, you have a guide around you that wants to talk to you. His name is Joe Barr. Okay, so she said, I want you to call him in 3 times and he will give you messages. So I did. I started calling him in, and he did. He started giving me these symbols. Okay, so first when I saw these things floating by my eyes, I actually thought I had a detached retina from my accident, to be honest with you. So I went to the eye doctors, and they said no. So I started drawing them. And it took a while for me to get the drawings the way I perceived they wanted them to see Joe Barr, my guide. So I didn't see him as a being. I saw him as a light form. He was kind of a green, shadowy light form. And they kept coming and coming and coming. And then it took me probably, I'm going to say it was almost a 10-year process to get all these symbols, and then finally get a name for each one of them, and then an affirmation. So these symbols are really used as a prayer to try to change your cellular structure into something more positive.
As a result of this channeling, Sybil now has a variety of symbols that are used in her healing practices, and she has developed 4 garden representatives of the ancient elements: earth, fire, water, and air, which are also used in her healing practice. Clearly, a case of the other side manifesting in the physical world through a spirit guide. However, the most common paranormal phenomenon people experience are the extraordinary coincidences that show up in everyday life called synchronicities. You're wondering what to do with your life, and you come across the book that's out of place in a bookstore about gardening. 5 years later, you look back and say, this was the beginning of you becoming a master gardener. For Steve McIntosh, a modern-day philosopher of science, religion, and politics, synchronicities represent a breakthrough of the transcendent realm into ordinary life.
I think that the reality of synchronicities, and indeed the function of providence overall in the universe, you know, laws of karma, there have been plenty of different ways to describe this. I think that the best way to understand it is to recognize sort of levels of reality. But even while the normal everyday reality that constitutes the sort of the modernist agreement, the scientific agreement about what's true, even though that is one level of truth, there's a higher, more mysterious level of truth we don't understand, through which, as moves the whole, so moves the part.
This sort of life-guiding providence is represented in the following dramatization of a sequence of coincidences.
I never believed much in signs and that sort of thing. Then, well, after the economic collapse of 9/11, it all changed. Before that, my husband and I had a great relationship. Our second child was on her way, but the bottom fell out economically. Jeremy's graphic design business collapsed. I was still working, but I knew there were some really tough times ahead, and I was really anxious. I began to doubt Jeremy and even our relationship. I remember the first sign. It was when I went to the gas station to fill, and the meter went off at 7.77 gallons. And then I noticed a few cars that had 777 in their license plate numbers. The next day I went to a coffee shop and picked up a USA Today. The lead story was Boeing 777 Dreamliner crash. And then the following day at the grocery store, my exact change was 7.77. At that moment, I felt a sudden shift in my state. It was as if the sun was burning through a hole on a foggy morning. I was giddy with positive energy. Then it came to me. I rarely gambled. I told Jeremy to call his niece and see if she could sit the kids. We're going to Black Hawk Casino, I said. Well, he was shocked. 2 hours later, we got to the casino, and I headed straight for the first 777 slot machine I could find. Within 10 minutes, I had won the $25,000 jackpot. That jolt of energy I felt that day in the grocery store has never left me. I can't explain it, but I see the world completely differently. I've opened up. I'm waiting to see what life has to offer me next. And there's been some great opportunities, not just for me, but for Jeremy also.
Synchronicities can come in so many different forms, so many different ways. So sometimes it will be a certain pattern that will show up several times in a short amount of time, you know, all kind of pointing toward a similar meaning. And so in that case, then you begin to formulate something, you begin to gather from all of those, and maybe that's what you need is more than one to get your attention.
What do all these situations have in common? They point to a connection minds have with a greater reality. It is the reality of the paranormal that we are all interconnected with. It is the reality of archetypes, the collective unconscious, and synchronicities, a non-physical realm that impacts and controls much of each person's life. Alan Combs is a professor of psychology and consciousness development and author of the definitive book on synchronicity. He explains what all synchronicities have in common.
Well, according to Jung, synchronicity is the coincidence of two events. Essentially, one is internal in the person's own psyche or in their experience or in their dream or fantasy or thought life, and the other one is external, and it's a real event in the world. So the alignment of these two in a way that's not causally obvious at all is what makes a synchronicity. I mean, you might look at a skillet where eggs are frying and you have the notion in your mind of eggs frying and you can eat them. That's not synchronicity. Probably the most famous incident of synchronicity straight out of Jung was the patient he had, the lady who was having a series of dreams in which she saw this beetle. And it was looked a lot like the Egyptian scarab beetle, which is the beetle you see on the throne or on the crowns of many Egyptian well-to-dos. And among other things, it is symbolic of transformation. And she, while reporting this dream to Jung in his study, was interrupted by a rapping on the window. And they looked over and there was a beetle flying against the window making some noise. And Carl Jung opened the window and took it in hand, and it was the nearest relative to the Egyptian scarab beetle to be found in those parts of the world, in Switzerland. So this coincidence of the external and the internal is what marks a synchronicity. And when it happens, it's often startling, striking, if not startling. Certainly startled this woman who had been to several therapists and made no progress. Evidently, her big problem, according to Jung, was that she was so rational. The whole world had to be rational. Well, this pretty much cured her of that. After this event, she began to make progress. It was a breakthrough moment for her.
With this understanding of the relationship between the external everyday world and the internal realm of the mind, Let's now look at a story of synchronicity to understand better how synchronicities break through and rupture the ordinary fabric of reality.
Everything should have been perfect, but I was deeply unhappy. I was graduating from college with the rest of my life before me, and yet I was in a real quandary and I didn't know what to do. I was in love. James, he was a wonderful man, smart, kind, gentle. But my family and many of my friends did not approve of us being together. And heaven forbid, marriage was out of the question as far as they were concerned. It was because James was white. No one thought a biracial couple was a good idea. I was getting phone calls from everyone in my family to call off the relationship. I didn't know what to do, so I left the house and I started walking around town. After a while, I was walking by this church when this young man came out of the church and walked up to me. He was well-dressed, with a bow tie. He handed me this bag and he said, "I believe this is what you're looking for. I suggest Corinthians." He walked back into the church. I pulled a King James Bible out of the bag and I leafed through it till I came to Corinthians. And I came to a verse that was underlined, 13:13. But now abideth faith, hope, love, these three, and the greatest of these is love. My eyes filled with tears. I understood that the most important thing was love. I don't know who that man was. Perhaps he was an angel. Jim and I, we've been married for 10 years, and we have 2 children. Our lives are filled with so much peace and joy every day. We both have great careers, all because I embrace the power of love.
The person who is trying to decide whether to get married or not amidst some resistance from her family, one of the interesting things about that is that she received this Bible from somebody who just seemed to be hanging out. There are many types of synchronicities where there will be another person involved or some weird way that information will come to you. So that's a very important thing to look for. And here it was. Somebody just hands her a Bible, and chances are that really resonated for her. It was the right kind of vehicle or the right kind of way to receive the message. And then from there, it's really very subjective. So that part of it, of her discovering that passage, is really the subjective part for her. Other people with that kind of an experience might end up doing something very different. But to me, the part to really pay attention to is when information comes to us in surprising ways, and to be open to that.
Synchronicity to me is, as a Zen person, is the moments of inexplicable magic, when something occurs that is a coincidence or has a kind of a poetic meaning that I don't have a way to explain. What I know is what the felt sense is. Like there's just this, suddenly there's like a collision of meaning. And so there's almost an aesthetic recognition of some beauty in the world that has to do with me. There's something personal. So an example would be when I was given Dharma transmission, for some reason, a friend of mine who's a guitarist wrote a song for me as a gift, and he sent it to me, and it was called 10,000 Butterflies. And it was just this really beautiful guitar solo that he wrote. And that night I went to a fundraiser at our local Natural History Museum, and I didn't know what it was about, and they had a display of 10,000 butterflies, and it was only for one night, 24 hours, 10,000 butterflies in all directions. So I just received this gift, and then I received this other gift, and they were the same thing, and I couldn't help but feel that they were meant for me.
Synchronicities often are accompanied by a jolt of energy that can move you forward, break you free from a psychic knot that is holding you back.
it's certainly true that when people go out looking for something, if you're hankering for something, you feel some destiny. A young person seeking a career, an old person seeking something meaningful for their lives, it seems to draw coincidences toward you. You stumble into materials in the library, what Arthur Koestler used to call, he used to call it the library angel, that you would go in the library, or always worked with me in bookstores and magazine shops. You would stumble onto articles and books that are very helpful. And if you don't find them, you don't like it. He said, you know, people get to expect a certain degree of help from that. And the great yogi, Yogan Aurobindo, and his partner, the mother, she talked about that. She says, once you're on a spiritual path, things will come to you. You'll stumble onto things. I've had people send me books. I don't even know who they are or why they send me the book, but it just appeared in my mailbox at just the right time. So there's that kind of, that to me is a kind of synchronicity, because synchronicity, at least in the Jungian sense or in any sense, has something to do with, if it's one of these more powerful synchronicities, a kind of sense of destiny or a kind of yearning or something deeper in the psyche that's pulling you in some direction or other, and it seems to pull things toward you, resources, people, books, and so on.
It is an odd thing that it seems to happen a lot, that synchronicities occur more, or maybe they're more noticeable during transition times in life. Maybe that's partly because a certain pressure has built up, that something is coming to an end and something new is trying to come in. And if it was maybe like a river flowing and bumping up against a rock, well, maybe it builds a while and then it flows around it. So that might be one image to begin to think about how that could be. But that is often the case in our lives. We feel stuck and something's trying to emerge, and so suddenly, boom, something happens, and it can be encouraging and kind of pull us. If it might be a way, rather than being pushed, something is pulling us toward a new place, a new experience or reality.
Clearly, coincidences point to another transcendent realm beyond everyday life, a transcendent realm that nevertheless has a non-causal connection to you and every other mind in our world.
There's something about human life which creates a veil. In other words, that within our human understanding, we are behind a veil, and that there is a larger reality to the universe that's not just in our heads, it's not just mental, it's not just subjective, but it's not physical, or it's not in time and space in the same way that normal objects and events are in the physical universe. So when when the veil parts, so to speak, right, when influences from this transcendent dimension impact the world, primarily through the experience of individuals, it's pointing to something that we can't understand from a reductionistic framework. That's why being rational about these things, in a sense, is an opportunity for us to evolve our understanding. This is sort of the leading edge of the challenge to a scientific worldview.
From telekinesis to remote viewing to precognition to channeling to spirit guides to higher entities such as a loving God to synchronicities. These are all paranormal phenomenon that are to some degree accepted as part of parapsychology or even a more inclusive science. Inexplicable, but real. But what about the growing number of contact experiences from ghosts, aliens, interdimensional beings, a loving God, apparitions, and cryptids such as Bigfoot? How do they fit into the realm of the paranormal? Remember, all of the scientifically studied cases of the paranormal involve consciousness and the human mind. A mind on careful examination reveals that it does not exist and cannot be found in the world of space, time, and objects. A substrate free of life and death. The human mind has no boundaries and in some sense already exists in a greater reality beyond the human senses defined by science. It is a greater reality that every human mind is connected to, a reality that has been described as beyond the veil or part of the matrix. This greater reality or domain shows up when people get glimpses of its nature, its possibilities, and even non-human intelligent beings that somehow dwell within it. And they show up for each individual person when needed. Paranormal occurrences that show up unexpectedly, as what happened during the following Bigfoot contact experience.
He was walking into a clearing which I could see that was lit up by the sun. There was trees that were about 20 yards apart, and he was walking in between two crops of trees, pine trees, going out into a clearing. And as he walked into the clearing, there was a shimmer that began as a circle. And it came in like this, and it kept going like this, and as he kept walking, everything that was on the outside of the shimmer disappeared, and it got to the center, and it just went away. And at that point, it was gone. And I observed closely to see if there was any way that it could have shifted right or left, or if it went straight ahead, but it didn't. It was walking into the clearing, and it just vanished. And everybody got excited. We couldn't believe what we saw. It was just really a life-changing experience for me.
Indeed, it would appear that these glimpses of the greater reality are chosen by that reality for each individual.
One of the things that I have sought to research in my own work is that how do these experiences compare with a historical perspective of transformation of people through some kind of contact. If we look at the contactee literature, we have people talking about fairies, about angels, about spiritual masters, religious figures, coming into contact with them and having suddenly an explosion of change in their consciousness and even in the body. Awakening of what in spiritual terms would be called superpowers.
The next story reveals how ghosts or apparitions often show up and change a person's view of reality and change their lives going forward.
A little over 40 years ago, I made a promise. At the moment I made the promise, it didn't seem like very much, but by the time I got home from school, it was a promise that would change my life, probably saved my life. I was a sophomore in high school back in the early 70s, and drugs were just coming into my hometown. And I remember Jay Belair, he was the local dealer. He provided drugs for all my friends, mostly marijuana, although some of them were dropping acid. But he lived in my neighborhood, and he was the coolest kid. Rode an old Harley, wore leathers. I mean, this kid, if you didn't want to be Jay Belair, you wanted to be with him. And I wanted to be one of the crowd, so when they asked me to join him, I said yes. So the plans were set, and I was going to smoke my first joint on Saturday. That Friday afternoon at school, I remember I was walking down the hall to my history class, and it's a long hall with windows all on one side, and a light was streaming in. I looked up, and there's Jay Belair walking right to me. I'm feeling pretty good about tomorrow and smoking my first joint. Was pretty full of myself. I couldn't really see his face till he was like almost on me. And he grabbed a fistful of shirt and shoved me up against the lockers. I was like, I didn't know what to think. I hear you're going to be smoking some marijuana tomorrow. That right, kid? I couldn't speak. He shook his head. You got to promise me never do drugs. They're bad for you. I stared in his face. His eyes were blazing like little suns. I still couldn't talk. Promise me, he said. I promise. Dropped me to the floor like an old gym bag. Disappeared around the corner. And by the time I got home from school that afternoon, I was feeling pretty good about myself. Told my friends what had happened. I laughed and I said, I'm not going to keep my promise to Jay Belair. Who does he think he is? And one of my best friends growing up, Bobby, he stands up and he looks at me and he goes, Mark, didn't you hear? Jay Belair was killed in a motorcycle accident last night. He was stoned out of his mind, drove off the bridge into the Missouri River. Last night. So, I never did drugs. I kept my promise to Jay. I mean, wouldn't you?
This story illustrates how ghosts or apparitions show up and intervene in a person's life. These apparitions are usually one-time short events experienced by a single individual. They can be in the form of a visual occurrence or can be felt as a sense of a higher intelligent presence or can be associated with a place that appears to be haunted. Hauntings, which come and go as well, can be experienced individually or by multiple people. However, in all cases, there needs to be a mind to receive the apparition or ghost and tell the story of how it impacted the individual. Indeed, perhaps all those ghost hunters have it wrong. Instead of hunting for ghosts, they should let the ghosts come to them to see what the ghostly realm has for them. What's becoming clear is that the time has come to embrace parapsychology, psi events, and powers as one huge domain to be studied as a single phenomenon. The domain that connects every human mind to an underlying, unlimited reality.
From the get-go, I saw interrelationships between cryptids, paranormal activity, UFO activity, even metaphysical and spiritual activity. Everything is interconnected by the proverbial 6 degrees or less than separation.
Tom Powell is a longtime Sasquatch paranormal investigator and author.
I think years and years ago, people were studying all this stuff separately. Now I think we're sort of putting it all together into one big investigative topic called the paranormal. At least we're willing to consider for the first time that they're all related, that you can't understand one thing without understanding them all. It's often said that if you want to understand what's going on in one paranormal realm, you have to widen the search and understand various aspects of the paranormal realm because there's so much overlap between these seemingly separate subjects.
This idea that all paranormal phenomenon are, in an important sense, representative of a single underlying reality or matrix connected to normal human life is validated by reports of what can be called paranormal hotspots. Places often characterized as portals, where multiple paranormal events are occurring in one place over a period of time. Places that were described by the great Christian mystic Thomas Merchant as thin to the other side.
When you go into a power place, this is where we experience invisible nature, where we're able to perceive it or perhaps even interpret it in a visual way. Power spots are the places where the veil is the thinnest, as you said, but they're also places to connect to the invisible realm.
One such paranormal hotspot has been called the Owl Moon Lab, situated just south of Cottage Grove, Oregon. Hearing about this paranormal hotspot, Tom Powell went to investigate firsthand what was going on.
Tom.
What's up, brother?
Tom, Daryl.
Nice meeting you.
Thanks for having us.
Ellen, nice to meet you.
Cameraman.
Hey.
So you can attest to the craziness here.
Yeah, like I always say, I was normal when I got here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the epicenter. If I would call this anything, this would be the Faraday cage, the transmitter.
Strange events started occurring when Tobe and Daryl cast the Bigfoot knee prints found in the backwoods and brought them back to Daryl's place.
As soon as we brought those knees and housed them here, it seemed like a giant welcoming committee said, oh, okay, you got something. We like it, you like it, maybe we'll come visit more often.
Well, the axiom there is that when you start studying them, they start studying you. So that's a John Keel-ism that he tendered back in the 60s when he was looking into these paranormal matters, and the more he looked at it, the more he became aware that he was being observed or scrutinized, and many a Bigfoot researcher has had that experience. They know where I live.
Yeah.
One of the most common forms of interaction with Bigfoot and other paranormal entities is called gifting. As is the case in many synchronicities, there is the unexpected appearance, exchange, and moving of material objects such as feathers, rocks, and personal items, indicating some higher reality that is aware of people's minds and a kind of understanding of their inner psyche.
The gifts here are extremely personal. They seem to not only listen to what you're saying, but understand who family members are that may have been to this property or haven't been to this property. Some of the things that have happened here are apportations, objects that appear out of nowhere or seemingly nowhere. Cindy has heart surgery, his wife. They bring her a little glass heart and set it by the hummingbird feeder. So this was our rock setup here, and one of the things that we would do, actually only recently after we found out that this was a thing that people were doing, is we would spell things out with letters. And oh, by the way, they don't walk in. When they interact with a puzzle, because we record behind this wall, they interact with the puzzle like they're hanging like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. They drop into existence, you hear them vocalize, huff, they do the percussive, whatever, and then they work the puzzle, and then they're gone.
People in the neighborhood constantly report many cases of an unexplained aerial phenomenon. Daryl describes what he captured on his cell phone one evening.
I believe it was like a Sunday night, right when high school graduation stuff was going on. I brought my dog out about 11 at night, and right above that tree line there, I saw something that appeared to be fireworks going off. So I thought that maybe there's some kids up in the woods doing fireworks for graduation or something. As I stood there for a minute, the thing started coming this way, and it wasn't fireworks. And I tried to hold my phone as good as I could, and it just kept going all over the place. It was really hard to stay up with, but then it would just flash, look like a jellyfish or something, like flash, expand and flash, go off, vanish for a minute sometimes, and then come right back in a little different area. And then it just kept doing that, and then it got right over me, and it just went out, and it was gone. And I stood there for a while, and it never came back.
The aerial object Daryl filmed is identical to what was identified in History Channel's recent series, Unidentified, Inside America's UFO Investigation, as some sort of alien energy crafts that have been photographed around the world. Much of the most significant paranormal activity here comes from Tobe and Daryl's EVPs, known by ghost hunters as electronic voice phenomenon. That is, audio recordings that let you hear from spirit voices that are not picked up by the human ear. Some of these have the quality of ghosts.
We got an EVP the day of the funeral of the boy that committed suicide that grew up in this room, the prior owners. The day of his memorial, we got an EVP of a child saying, "I'm dead." We went in there to check the EVP, and we found these. These are little tiny four-fingered handprints that are infused into the bedroom door. They're chalky white handprints about twice as small as mine. These are the actual prints here, and if you can see, they're very unusual anatomically. They have hard line edges in the palm here. They're gnarled at the fingertips and kind of twisted.
So we have a case here of ghosts communicating with Daryl and Tobe. Next, Tobe invited Tom to listen to a number of the unusual sounds they have recorded in and outside the shed.
This is what this place turns into. That's right here. For 30 minutes. Not a thing moved off the counter, not a dent, not a bird shit.
Yeah. They're tearing the camp up at night, and in the morning, there's nothing touched. That's where this place is.
You want to hear a Bigfoot sound? Okay. I don't know if it gets better than that.
That's your standard moneymaker scream.
That's from the apple orchard. That's in the backyard.
Yeah, behind here.
The Owl Moon Lab is typical of paranormal hotspots with a wide range of paranormal events constantly occurring in a single geographical location, helping validate the hypothesis that paranormal phenomenon are part of a connected greater reality, a reality that is connected to all human minds that are open.
For the most part, this has a very distinct, tailor-made delivery card for individuals. Maybe that's the other reason why we can't figure all this out, because it's a million different stories for a million different types of encounters.
What we're finding, I think, is that these places exist on the surface of the earth. And if you put yourself in these places, if you can first identify these places and then put yourself in them, things happen with a lot more regularity, and things happen a lot more dramatically. So as much as anything, we're just going around trying to find these power spots, trying to find these vortexes, wormholes, whatever you want to call them, and then see what's going on there that we can hopefully begin to understand.
Similar hotspots have been reported from Massachusetts to Indiana to Arkansas to Colorado to Oregon to Montana to Nebraska, all centered on the paranormal experiences of some very ordinary people. So questions remain. What are all these glimpses and contact experiences of the underlying reality about? Why have these contacts with a reality that is not part of the scientific world of space-time and objects? What is their purpose for the individual and humanity? As the great quantum physicist David Bohm has argued, the very act of experiencing the paranormal changes it and helps it unfold, pointing to the underlying connection of all things.
We are internally related to everything, not externally related. Consciousness is an internal relationship to the whole. We take in the whole and we act toward the whole. And that internal, whatever we have taken in, determines basically what we are.
Let me expand the conversation a little bit to talk about different dimensions and different ways of understanding being and who we are and why we are here on this planet at this time. Reiki is one of a number of different interventions that can allow us to understand what's outside of our human condition. We're reminded over and over again that we are humans, we are spiritual people having a human experience, that this is not all there is.
So you move up into things like conscious telepathy, unconscious forms of telepathy, feelings of physiological connection at a distance, precognition, and so on. You can go all the way up the ladder until you get to full-blown mystical experiences. And again, all of them have to do with experience that is transcending space and time. I would say that from a science perspective now, our understanding of mystical and psychic experience suggests that we're not evolving towards these phenomena, and we're not devolving away from them either. What we're seeing is a reflection of simply the way that the world is stuck together. We're looking at the fabric of reality. If the fabric of reality is truly holistic and fully connected in some way, as leading physics suggests, then it shouldn't be too surprising that occasionally we should experience that. Like we can experientially somehow grasp this interconnectedness. And so I speculate that when people talk about psychic connections or mystical connections, that there's a little glimpse of this holistic connection that is there, and it has always been there.
I know that there is operating in the universe a kind of a higher providence, and that to the extent that I'm aligning myself with this higher providence, to the extent that I'm making my decisions and living my life in accordance with the flow of the Tao or the will of God or, you know, the law of karma, that these larger sort of mysterious functions of the universe can be gradually bent somewhat in my favor. And how that works, you know, I don't have a rational explanation for it, but I don't think that it's necessarily all magic and myth.
So in all cases of the paranormal, whether contact experiences such as Bigfoot encounters or skills like remote viewing or aligning with the will of God or providence, these are all a kind of superpower that can be practiced and developed. Practiced and developed, making for a richer life and a broader connection with a deeper reality.